Welcome to Café Stories. I'm Alfie, your host for today's mystery. We're joining Father Brown today in a remote monastery outside Milan with the Devil's Psalms. Before we begin, I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from today. Let me know in the comments. Our story takes us to the snow-covered hills of Lombardy, where a choir director is found poisoned during midnight mass, his face frozen in agony, with a cryptic note left behind. Father Brown will need all his powers of moral insight and quiet observation to solve this musical murder mystery. Settle in with a warm cup of coffee, stay curious, and let's ease into it. The Devil's Psalms. Chapter 1. The Silenced Cantor. It is an odd truth that holiness and horror often share the same architecture. The monastery of San Cipriano, perched like an eagle's nest among the Lombardy foothills, proved this paradox perfectly on that winter's night. Its ancient stone walls, which had for centuries enclosed the murmured prayers of devoted men, now contained something entirely different. The silence of a man who would pray no more. The snow had been falling since early afternoon, transforming the steep mountain road into a treacherous white serpent that wound up toward the monastery's gates. It was along this difficult path that a small, round figure trudged steadily upward, occasionally stopping to shake the snow from a large black umbrella that seemed comically inadequate against the alpine winter. Behind him, a much taller man with broad shoulders labored with their baggage, his athletic frame making somewhat better progress through the drifts. "I confess, Father," said the tall man with a Gallic accent, "that I do not understand why the bishop could not have waited until the spring thaw to become concerned about choir politics." Father Brown, for the small cleric was indeed he, peered up at his companion with mild eyes that somehow contained both simplicity and unfathomable depth. "It wasn't the choir that concerned him, Flambeau," he replied softly. "It was the blood." The monastery bell began to toll as they reached the iron-studded gate, its resonant voice cutting through the muffled silence of the snowy night with mathematical precision. 9 solemn notes rang out and then ceased, leaving a vacuum of sound more complete for having been broken. "We are late," said Father Brown, though whether he meant late for prayers or late for something else was not entirely clear. The gate creaked open without their having knocked, as though the ancient building had been expecting them. A monk stood in the archway, his face half hidden by the shadow of his cowl, yet visibly marked by sleeplessness and something that might have been fear. "Father Brown, the bishop's telegram said you would come today. I am Brother Angelo, the abbot's secretary. We had nearly given up hope in this weather." His voice carried the musical lilt of northern Italy, but the melody was rendered discordant by underlying tension. "The mountains make their own schedule," said Father Brown mildly. "This is my friend Monsieur Flambeau." Brother Angelo nodded curtly to the Frenchman, but seemed uninterested in pleasantries. "You should come in at once. The abbot wishes to speak with you before Compline." The courtyard beyond the gate was a perfect square of untrodden snow, marked only by a single set of footprints leading from the chapel to the dormitory wing. Father Brown noticed this with quiet interest, as they were led through a series of stone corridors, their footsteps echoing like distant drum beats against the vaulted ceilings. The abbot's study was warm, almost uncomfortably so after the chill of the journey. A fire blazed in a stone hearth that might have witnessed the prayers of monks since the time of St. Benedict himself. Before it stood a tall, ascetic man with a face like weathered parchment, his expression suggesting that whatever was written there contained more sorrow than joy. "Father Brown," he said, extending thin fingers that seemed more bone than flesh, I am Abbot Celestino. Forgive me for not greeting you at the gate. These past days have been—" He searched for a word. "Unprecedented." "The bishop's telegram was rather brief," said Father Brown, accepting a seat near the fire. "He mentioned only that your choir director had died under mysterious circumstances." "Died?" The abbot's laugh held no humour. "Maestro Benedetto was murdered, Father. Poisoned during the midnight mass 3 days ago, practically at the foot of the altar, found slumped over the organ keys with a note pinned to his robe. He shall sing no more, as if the manner of his death were not message enough." Flambeau, who had been warming his hands by the fire, turned sharply. "Poison? You are certain?" His face was— The abbot made a gesture as if to ward off the memory. "The doctor from Milan said it was a poison that causes paralysis of the breathing, slow and aware. He knew he was dying, could not call out, could not move. Only his expression could speak of his suffering." Father Brown's mild face had not changed, but he had taken out a small notebook and was making careful notes with a stub of pencil. "And the monks?" he asked. "How many are in residence?" 17, including myself," replied the abbot. "And there is Lorenzo?" "Lorenzo?" Father Brown looked up. "He is not a monk, not any more." The abbot's expression darkened. "Lorenzo Vicari was once our most gifted chorister. Maestro Benedetto had him expelled 3 years ago for inappropriate innovations in the sacred music, for blasphemy, some said." "And he has returned?" Father Brown asked, his voice carrying no judgment. "A week ago, he claimed to seek reconciliation." The abbot shook his head slowly. "Now, Benedetto is dead." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, casting long shadows across the ancient stone floor. Father Brown closed his notebook and returned it to his pocket with the deliberation of a man putting away a precious relic. "I should like to see where it happened," he said quietly. The abbot nodded grimly. "The body has been removed, but nothing else has been disturbed. I had the organ loft sealed until someone could tell us what to do." As they rose to follow the abbot, the monastery bells began to toll again, their bronze voices measuring out time in the age-old pattern. Father Brown paused to listen, his head slightly tilted, as if he heard in their regulated rhythm something beyond mere sound, perhaps the heartbeat of the mystery itself, counting down to a revelation not yet glimpsed. The snow continued to fall beyond the leaded windows, isolating the monastery from the world below as completely as if it had been lifted into the clouds. Within these walls, among men dedicated to the harmony of heaven, someone had orchestrated death instead, and in the mathematical precision of those tolling bells, Father Brown sensed lay both the puzzle and its solution. Chapter 2. The Disgraced Brother. The chapel of San Cipriano possessed that peculiar quality of sacred spaces which makes them appear larger from within than without. As Father Brown stood beneath its vaulted ceiling, he felt as though he had stepped not merely into a building but into the physical manifestation of centuries of faith. Yet tonight, this monument to divine harmony had been transformed into a testament to human discord. "The body was discovered here," said Abbot Celestino, leading them up a narrow spiral staircase to the organ loft, "during the glory of the midnight mass." The wooden railing at the top still bore a smudge of dark wax, where the official seal had been broken to admit them. The organ itself was a magnificent instrument, its polished pipes rising like a metallic forest toward the ceiling. Before it stood a simple wooden bench, and on the ivory keys lay a sheet of paper, yellowed with age and covered in musical notation. "The note was pinned to his robe," the abbot explained, "but this music sheet is what he was playing when—" When it happened, Brother Ambrose, our second organist, had to complete the Mass. Father Brown approached the organ with a reverence that had nothing to do with music. He studied the sheet without touching it, his round face thoughtful. "Gregorian chant," he murmured. "Very old notation." "Maestro Benedetto was a scholar of ancient music," replied the abbot. "He was transcribing forgotten chants from our library's collection." Father Brown nodded absently, his attention caught by something on the floor. He bent down with some difficulty, his portly figure not designed for such manoeuvres, and examined a faint dark stain on the wooden planks. "When did Lorenzo return to the monastery?" he asked, straightening up. The abbot's face tightened. "He arrived 8 days ago, claiming he wished to make amends. Benedetto was reluctant." "I should like to speak with this Lorenzo," said Flambeau, who had been examining the organ pipes with the eye of a man who appreciated craftsmanship in all its forms. "After Compline," the abbot agreed, "though I doubt you will find him repentant. The man has changed since his departure." The bells began again, their solemn cadence summoning the monks to prayer. Father Brown listened attentively, counting each toll as if reconciling them with some inner calculation. "You mentioned that Benedetto had Lorenzo expelled," he said. "On what grounds precisely?" The abbot hesitated, his gaunt face troubled. "Lorenzo began incorporating strange harmonies into the sacred chants. He claimed they were authentic ancient forms, but Benedetto insisted they were corruptions, even blasphemous. Their arguments became heated." "Physical?" asked Flambeau directly. "Once," admitted the abbot. "Lorenzo threatened Benedetto with a candelabra. It was after that incident that he was asked to leave." They descended from the loft as the monks began to file into the chapel below, cowled figures moving with the practiced synchronicity of men who had followed the same routine for decades. Father Brown noticed that they kept their eyes averted from the organ loft, as if it had become a place of contagion. After Compline, they were led to a small chamber in the guest wing where a fire had been lit against the mountain chill. A young monk brought bread, cheese, and wine, setting them down with hands that trembled slightly. "Brother Ambrose," the abbot introduced, "our remaining organist." The young monk bowed nervously. He had the pale, indoor complexion common to scholars, with ink stains on his fingers and anxious eyes that darted between the visitors. "Brother Ambrose worked closely with Maestro Benedetto," explained the abbot. "He was present when it happened." "I didn't see anything unusual," Brother Ambrose said quickly, as if he had been accused. "Maestro Benedetto was perfectly well when the Mass began. Then during the Gloria, his hands stopped moving on the keys. I thought at first he was allowing for a moment of silence, but then he made a strange sound, not loud, just a sort of gasp, and his head fell forward." "And where was Lorenzo during this time?" asked Father Brown gently. "In the choir with the other lay brothers," replied Ambrose. "I could see him from the loft. He never approached Maestro Benedetto." Father Brown nodded thoughtfully. "And the note?" "It was pinned to his habit when he was found," said the abbot, "but no one saw it being placed there." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a man whose very posture seemed a challenge. He was perhaps 30, with the intense eyes of a fanatic or a genius, and though he wore the simple garb of a lay brother, he carried himself with none of the customary humility. "Lorenzo Vicari," he announced, making the introduction sound like a proclamation. "I'm told you wish to speak with me, though I've already told everything to the doctor from Milan." "Please, sit," said Father Brown mildly. Lorenzo remained standing. "I did not kill Benedetto, though heaven knows he deserved his fate." "For expelling you?" asked Flambeau. For silencing the truth, Lorenzo replied with sudden passion. Benedetto was a fraud who built his reputation on lies. He suppressed authentic ancient forms because they contradicted his precious theories. These theories being about Gregorian chant? Father Brown inquired, reaching for a piece of cheese with the absent manner of a man more interested in his supper than the conversation. About everything, Lorenzo's voice rose. He claimed to be a purist, but he manipulated the historical record to suit himself. When I discovered notations that disproved his work, he destroyed my reputation rather than admit he was wrong. Yet you returned, observed Father Brown, chewing thoughtfully. Something complicated passed across Lorenzo's face. I came to confront him with new evidence, manuscripts from Florence that prove I was right. I wanted... He faltered for the first time. I wanted him to admit it before the Brotherhood. And did he? Asked Flambeau. We never had the chance to discuss it fully, Lorenzo replied, his expression darkening. He avoided me, and when he did speak to me, it was only to say that he would consider my evidence when he had more time. As if 3 years hadn't been enough. Where were you during the midnight mass? Father Brown asked, his mild tone unchanged. With the choir, where a dozen men can verify my presence, Lorenzo answered sharply. I never left my place, never approached the organ loft, and had no opportunity to poison Benedetto even if I had wished to. Which, he added, with a defiant glare at the abbot, I did not. After Lorenzo had departed, his footsteps echoing angrily down the stone corridor, Father Brown turned to the abbot with an expression of polite inquiry. You have other suspects in mind, I presume? The abbot looked troubled. Father, we are a brotherhood dedicated to God's work. The idea that any of us could commit such an act is unthinkable. Yet someone has thought it, replied Father Brown quietly. I should like to examine the victim's quarters tomorrow, if I may. Later, in the small guest cell allocated to him, Father Brown stood at the narrow window, watching the continuing snowfall isolate the monastery ever more completely from the world below. The soft glow of a lantern in the bell tower caught his attention, and he observed with interest the silhouette of a figure moving rhythmically, adjusting the great mechanism that regulated the monastery's heartbeat. In the mathematical precision of those movements, as in the strict counterpoint of the chants and the regulated lives of the monks themselves, lay patterns that both concealed and revealed, and somewhere within that rigid framework of order, someone had composed a requiem of revenge whose final notes had yet to be played. Chapter 3. The Monastery's Clockwork. Morning arrived at San Cipriano not with the sun, which remained hidden behind dense clouds still heavy with snow, but with the precise mechanical announcement of the bells. Father Brown, who had been awake for some time in contemplation, counted each toll with quiet attention. The monastic day had begun, measured out in bronze intervals as regular as the beating of an enormous heart. After a sparse breakfast taken in silence with the brothers, Father Brown requested to see the bell tower. This seemed to perplex the abbot, who had expected the visitor to focus on the scene of the crime, or perhaps the victim's quarters. The bell tower, Father? I'm not sure what that could tell you about poor Benedetto's death. Father Brown smiled mildly. I find that in understanding a house, one must first understand how it tells time. The abbot raised his eyebrows, but summoned Brother Thomas, the elderly monk responsible for the monastery's timekeeping. Brother Thomas was a wizened little man who might have been carved from the same ancient oak as the monastery's furnishings. His hands, though gnarled with age, moved with surprising precision as he led them up the narrow, winding stairs of the tower. You've maintained the bells for many years, I imagine? Said Father Brown, pausing on the stone steps to catch his breath. 43 years, replied Brother Thomas with quiet pride. since I was a novice." "And has the schedule of prayers remained the same throughout that time?" The old monk hesitated. "The hours are fixed by tradition, of course. But within the monastery, small adjustments are sometimes necessary." "Recent adjustments?" Father Brown asked with casual interest. Brother Thomas glanced toward the abbot, who had followed them up the stairs. Something unspoken passed between them before the old monk answered. "Maestro Benedetto requested certain modifications last month, for musical purposes," he said. "What sort of modifications?" asked Flambeau, ducking his head beneath a low beam. "A matter of minutes only," said Brother Thomas. "To better accommodate the special chance for Advent, the midnight office was moved earlier by 12 minutes, and several daytime offices by similar small amounts." Father Brown nodded as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. "And these changes were recorded where?" "In the ledger," said Brother Thomas, leading them into the bell chamber itself. The room was dominated by the great bronze bells hanging in their wooden framework, but against one wall stood a small desk with an ancient ledger bound in cracked leather. Brother Thomas opened it with reverent hands, revealing columns of neat writing, documenting every toll of the bells for decades. "Maestro Benedetto made the changes here," he said, pointing to several entries marked with a different hand. Father Brown leaned forward, studying the altered times with careful attention. "And all the brothers were informed of these changes?" "A notice was posted in the refectory," said the abbot. "Though such minor adjustments hardly affect daily life. We live by the bells, whatever time they may ring." "Fascinating," murmured Father Brown, turning a page in the ledger. "And what is this notation here? These musical symbols in the margin?" Brother Thomas peered at the page. That was Benedetto's system. He said it helped him coordinate the choir's rehearsals with the bell schedule. "A musical shorthand," said Father Brown, looking thoughtful. "Most ingenious." As they descended from the tower, the little priest moved with the careful deliberation of one who is fitting pieces into a mental puzzle. When they reached the courtyard, he paused to watch a group of monks crossing toward the chapel, their movements synchronized by years of identical routine. "I should like to see the victims' quarters now," he said. Maestro Benedetto had occupied a cell slightly larger than those of the ordinary monks, befitting his position. It contained a narrow bed, a prie-dieu, and a substantial desk covered with musical manuscripts. The walls were lined with shelves of books and bound papers, all meticulously organized. "Nothing has been disturbed," the abbot assured them. "The doctor from Milan examined the room, but found nothing of note." Father Brown moved slowly around the chamber, his eyes taking in everything with the mild interest of a man viewing a moderately engaging museum exhibit. He paused at the desk, where several pages of musical notation lay beside an inkwell and a row of carefully sharpened quills. "Benedetto was working on a major project, I understand," he said. "A collection of ancient chants," confirmed the abbot. He had discovered some unusual notations in our library's oldest manuscripts and was preparing a scholarly edition. "Competition for such a work would be considerable," observed Flambeau. "Benedetto was the foremost authority on Gregorian chant in northern Italy," said the abbot with a touch of pride. The Vatican itself had expressed interest in his research. Father Brown had moved to the bookshelves and was examining the spines of several volumes with careful attention. "Some of these appear quite valuable." "The monastery's collection is extensive," said the abbot. "Benedetto had borrowing privileges for his research, including this." Father Brown had drawn out a slender volume bound in faded red leather. Unlike the others, this one bore no title on its spine. The abbot frowned. I don't recognize that particular work. Father Brown opened it carefully. The pages were covered not with text, but with musical notation in a style so ancient that even the abbot seemed puzzled by it. Most curious, said Father Brown, returning the book to its place with care. Tell me, who else besides Lorenzo might have had reason to resent Maestro Benedetto? The abbot's expression suggested he found the question inappropriate. We are a brotherhood, Father. Petty resentments have no place in monastic life. And yet, said Father Brown gently, Benedetto was murdered by someone within these walls. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, the abbot sighed. Brother Domenico, perhaps. He is our librarian, and was himself a musician of some note before taking orders. He and Benedetto occasionally disagreed on scholarly matters. Scholarly matters, repeated Father Brown, as if testing the weight of the phrase. Might I speak with Brother Domenico? The librarian proved to be a tall, thin man with the stooped shoulders of one who has spent a lifetime bending over books. His cell, adjacent to the library itself, was even more crowded with volumes than Benedetto's had been. Scholarly disagreements, he said, when Father Brown raised the subject. Certainly, but nothing that would provoke murder. Benedetto was stubborn and occasionally ungenerous in academic debate, but such is the nature of scholarship. The nature of the disagreement, prompted Father Brown. Brother Domenico hesitated. Primarily about the interpretation of certain neumes, notational marks in our oldest manuscripts, Benedetto favoured one reading, I another. His had become the accepted interpretation because of his position and reputation. And this caused resentment, suggested Flambeau. Truth is truth, said Domenico simply. I believed him wrong, but I did not hate him for it. God's time reveals all errors eventually. As they left the library, the bells began to toll for midday prayers. Father Brown paused, listening with close attention to their measured cadence. Then, to the abbot's evident surprise, he requested permission to skip the office and instead visit the refectory, where the notice of schedule changes had been posted. The refectory was empty at this hour, its long wooden tables scrubbed clean and waiting for the meal that would follow prayers. On a board near the door hung various notices and lists of duties. Father Brown studied them carefully, his expression revealing nothing. The schedule change is not posted here now, observed Flambeau. No, agreed Father Brown thoughtfully. I wonder when it was removed. Later, as the short winter day began to fade toward darkness, Father Brown stood at the window of his small guest cell, watching the courtyard below. The snow had stopped at last, and a few monks were clearing paths between the buildings. In the bell tower, a light appeared as Brother Thomas prepared for the evening office. Father Brown's round face, usually so mild and unassuming, wore an expression of troubled certainty. In this clockwork community, where every action was prescribed and every hour announced, someone had manipulated time itself to commit murder. And in the rigid patterns of bells and prayers and ancient music, Father Brown had begun to discern a design as precise and as deadly as the workings of the clock that ruled the monastery's life. Chapter 4. Ancient Harmonies. There exists in music a quality that other arts may envy but cannot duplicate, the ability to exist wholly in time, to create a mathematics of emotion that vanishes even as it manifests. Father Brown, who possessed only the most rudimentary knowledge of musical theory, nevertheless understood this essential mystery. Perhaps that was why, after evening prayers, he requested a most unusual demonstration. "You wish me to play Maestro Benedetto's compositions?" Brother Ambrose asked, his nervous hands fluttering like trapped birds. "All of them?" "Only those he was working on most recently," Father Brown replied, settling his small, round figure onto a wooden chair near the organ. The chapel was empty now, the monks having retired to their cells for the period of silence before sleep. Only Father Brown, Flambeau, Brother Ambrose, and the abbot remained beneath the vaulted ceiling where darkness gathered in the corners like pools of ancient secrets. "I'm not sure I understand the purpose," said the abbot, his austere face troubled. "Music speaks when words fail," said Father Brown with a smile that somehow managed to be both apologetic and firm. "And something here has failed rather dramatically to be spoken." Brother Ambrose seated himself at the organ with obvious trepidation. "Maestro Benedetto was very particular about who handled his compositions," he said, arranging several sheets of notation before him. These are the chants he was transcribing from the ancient manuscripts. As the young monk's fingers touched the keys, a sound of unearthly beauty filled the chapel. It was not merely music, but something older, a bridge between speech and song that seemed to echo from the earliest days of Christian worship. Father Brown closed his eyes, his expression one of intense concentration. The melody proceeded with the inexorable logic of plainchant, rising and falling like the breath of a sleeping giant. Then, without warning, it shifted into something stranger, a progression of notes that seemed at once archaic and oddly dissonant. "That passage," said Father Brown, opening his eyes. "Is that Benedetto's transcription or his composition?" Brother Ambrose looked startled. "His transcription, of course. Maestro Benedetto would never presume to compose original material in the Gregorian style. These are authentic ancient chants." "Authentic," murmured Father Brown, "but perhaps controversial?" The young monk hesitated. There were discussions about certain passages. Lorenzo claimed some of the notations Benedetto dismissed as copying errors were actually intentional. He said they represented a tradition of harmonics that had been suppressed. "Suppressed by whom?" asked Flambeau. "By the Church itself, according to Lorenzo," replied Brother Ambrose, lowering his voice though there was no one to overhear. He spoke of hidden knowledge in the music, mathematical principles that aligned with esoteric teachings the Church rejected. "Blasphemy, in other words," said the abbot severely. "Or perhaps merely musicology," suggested Father Brown mildly. "Might I see the original manuscript from which this particular chant was transcribed?" The abbot shook his head. "The original is kept in the Vatican Library. Benedetto worked from photographic copies." "Ah," said Father Brown, "and where might those copies be?" "In his quarters, presumably," said the abbot. "Unless," prompted Flambeau. "Unless they were among the items that appear to be missing," admitted the abbot reluctantly. Father Brown's eyebrows rose slightly. "You didn't mention missing items before." The abbot looked uncomfortable. "We only discovered it today. Brother Domenico was cataloguing Benedetto's papers and noticed that certain photographs and at least one notebook are unaccounted for." "Most interesting," said Father Brown. "Brother Ambrose, would you play the passage again, please, and perhaps the one that follows it?" As the music resumed, Father Brown once more closed his eyes, but his lips moved slightly, as if counting or perhaps praying. When the final notes faded into silence, he nodded as though something had been confirmed. "Tell me," he said to Brother Ambrose, "did Maestro Benedetto ever discuss the relationship between his musical theories and the monastery's bell schedule?" The question seemed to startle the young monk. Not directly, though he was fascinated by the mathematical precision of the bells. He said once that Brother Thomas's timepiece was more reliable for rehearsals than any modern clock. Father Brown nodded thoughtfully. "And this change in schedule that was implemented recently, Did it affect the timing of rehearsals? Yes, said Brother Ambrose, looking surprised at the priest's insight. It aligned the rehearsal period with certain passages in the manuscripts. Maestro Benedetto said it was important for the acoustics, something about the resonance of the bells complementing specific tonal patterns. A musical man to the last, murmured Father Brown. One final question, if I may. On the night of Benedetto's death, was the music he was playing at the moment he was silenced, was it the same as what you've just performed? Brother Ambrose shook his head. No, it was the traditional Gloria for the midnight Mass. Though he had incorporated some of his research into the arrangement, it was essentially the standard text. And yet, said Father Brown, he died with that particular manuscript before him on the organ. He gestured to the sheet music still resting on the keys. I didn't notice, stammered Brother Ambrose. When I took over, I was using the common prayer book, not his special notations. So, someone must have placed it there after his death, concluded Flambeau. Or perhaps, suggested Father Brown, he had been consulting it just before beginning to play. Brother Ambrose, would you be so kind as to show me exactly where you were standing when Maestro Benedetto collapsed? The young monk led them back up to the organ loft, pointing to a position slightly behind and to the left of the organ bench. I was here, turning pages, when he stopped playing. I thought at first he was simply pausing for effect. Then I saw his face. And the others? Lorenzo and the choir? Below in the chancel, said Brother Ambrose, pointing down to where the monks would stand during services. Lorenzo was in the back row near the wall. He wouldn't have been able to approach without being seen. Father Brown nodded, his attention caught by something on the wall of the loft. He moved closer to examine a small metal grill set into the wooden panelling. A speaking tube, he inquired. Yes, said the abbot. It connects to the bell tower. In the old days, before Brother Thomas had his chronometer, the organist would signal when to ring the bells for certain parts of the liturgy. Is it still used? Rarely, admitted the abbot, though Benedetto did have it cleared of dust and tested last month. He said it was a valuable historical feature that should be maintained. Father Brown examined the tube with careful attention, then turned back to the organ itself. He ran a finger lightly over the wooden surface beside the keyboard, pausing at a small, almost imperceptible stain. I should like to speak with Brother Thomas again, he said, and perhaps to see his chronometer. As they descended from the loft, the chapel's great clock began to strike the hour. Father Brown paused, counting each resonant toll with the same careful attention he had given to the bells themselves. 9 solemn strokes echoed through the ancient building, and in their measured cadence lay a precision that human hands had crafted, but could also manipulate. In the silence that followed, Father Brown's mild face wore an expression of troubled certainty. The monastery's music, both its ancient chants and the mathematical rhythm of its bells, concealed patterns that hinted at human intention rather than divine harmony. And in those patterns, he was beginning to discern not only the method of murder, but the complex motivations that had composed this deadly requiem. Chapter 5. The Missing Manuscript. It is one of the paradoxes of monastic life that institutions dedicated to the eternal are often the most meticulous keepers of temporal records. The library of San Cipriano was no exception, a treasure house of documents spanning nearly a millennium, each catalogued with a precision that would impress even the most fastidious of modern archivists. It was here that Father Brown found himself the following morning, watching as Brother Domenico unlocked a heavy wooden cabinet with a key that hung from a chain around his neck. "These are our most valuable manuscripts," explained the librarian monk, his long fingers moving with reverent care over ancient bindings. Benedetto had special permission to access them for his research. A considerable responsibility, observed Father Brown mildly. One he took most seriously, replied Brother Domenico. Benedetto may have had his faults, but carelessness with historical documents was not among them. The cabinet contained perhaps 24 volumes, each protected by a sleeve of acid-free linen. Brother Domenico drew out one with particular care, placing it on a reading stand designed for fragile manuscripts. "This is the antiphonary of Abbot Silvano from the 12th century," he said. "It contains some of the notations that were central to Benedetto's research." Father Brown leaned forward with interest, though it was clear from his expression that the ancient musical markings held little meaning for him. And the manuscript from the Vatican that he was studying, it was similar to this. Brother Domenico's face changed almost imperceptibly. "How did you know about that?" "Brother Ambrose mentioned photographic copies," said Father Brown. "Ah." The librarian seemed to relax slightly. Yes, the Vatican manuscript was from the same period, but contained several chants not recorded elsewhere. Benedetto believed they might be the only surviving examples of a particular tradition. "The same tradition Lorenzo championed?" suggested Flambeau, who had been examining the library's architecture with professional interest. Brother Domenico hesitated. Yes and no. Lorenzo believed the notations indicated something unorthodox. Benedetto insisted they were simply an early variant of conventional practice. Before Father Brown could pursue this further, they were interrupted by the arrival of the abbot. His austere face showed signs of strain, and he carried a telegram in his thin hand. "Forgive the interruption," he said, "but this has just arrived from Rome. I thought you should see it immediately." Father Brown accepted the telegram and read it with careful attention. His round face, usually so placid, registered mild surprise. "The Vatican Library reports a manuscript missing," he said to Flambeau. "A 10th century collection of chants that was being photographed for Maestro Benedetto's research." "Missing?" echoed Flambeau. "Stolen, you mean?" "The wording is diplomatic," replied Father Brown, returning the telegram to the abbot. "Temporarily misplaced during cataloguing, but yes, I believe theft is implied." "This is most disturbing," said the abbot. "The manuscript was of incalculable value, both historically and spiritually." "When was it discovered missing?" asked Father Brown. "Just yesterday, according to the telegram," replied the abbot. "Though it may have been gone longer, the library has been conducting an inventory." Father Brown nodded thoughtfully. "And Benedetto's photographs of this manuscript, they are among the items missing from his quarters." "Yes," confirmed Brother Domenico, along with his notebook containing transcriptions and annotations. "Most convenient," murmured Father Brown. "Tell me, when did Benedetto last visit Rome to consult the original?" 6 weeks ago," said the abbot, "just before Advent began." Father Brown's mild eyes took on a distant look, as though he were performing calculations. "And the changes to the bell schedule were implemented after his return?" "Yes," said the abbot, looking puzzled at this apparent non sequitur. "But surely there can be no connection between a missing manuscript in Rome and poor Benedetto's murder here." "Connections," said Father Brown, "are often like the neumes in your ancient music, present to those who know how to read them, invisible to those who do not." He turned back to Brother Domenico. "You mentioned that Lorenzo believed the notations indicated something unorthodox. What, precisely?" The librarian monk seemed uncomfortable. "It was nonsense, really. He claimed certain intervals and progressions in the chants corresponded to mathematical ratios considered significant in pre-Christian traditions." "Significant in what way?" pressed Flambeau. "In esoteric ways," replied Brother Domenico reluctantly. Lorenzo spoke of harmonic patterns that could affect the physical world, alter perceptions, even influence bodily functions. Medieval superstition, of course. "Of course," agreed Father Brown, though his tone suggested he found the idea less dismissible than the librarian did. "One last question, if I may. The monastery's finances, have they been affected by recent economic conditions?" This question seemed to startle the abbot more than any previous inquiry. Our finances? What could they possibly have to do with Benedetto's death? "Perhaps nothing," admitted Father Brown, "but in my experience, unexpected questions sometimes yield unexpected insights." After a moment of hesitation, the abbot sighed. "We have had difficulties. The restoration of the North Cloister has cost more than anticipated, and our traditional benefactors have been less generous since the war, but we are not destitute, Father." "And Benedetto's research, was it likely to bring prestige to San Cipriano, perhaps even financial support?" "The Vatican had expressed interest," acknowledged the abbot. "There was talk of a publication that would have brought attention to our library. But surely you cannot think—" "I try not to think too conclusively too soon," said Father Brown with a gentle smile. "It narrows the mind prematurely." They left the library to the sound of bells summoning the community to midday prayer. As they crossed the courtyard, now cleared of snow and gleaming with midday light, Father Brown paused to watch a hooded figure hurrying from the direction of the bell tower. "Brother Thomas, I believe," he said. "I should still like to examine his chronometer when there is time." "You seem very interested in our bells, Father," observed the abbot. "I am interested in how time was measured on the night Benedetto died," replied Father Brown. "In a community ruled by bells, minutes matter in ways they might not elsewhere." Later, as afternoon shadows lengthened across the courtyard, Father Brown stood at the window of his guest's cell, watching as several monks cleared the last of the snow from the paths. Among them was Lorenzo, working with a vigour that suggested physical labour was a welcome outlet for inner turmoil. When Flambeau joined him at the window, Father Brown gestured toward the former chorister. "A passionate man," he observed, "but passion alone rarely leads to the kind of calculated murder we are investigating." "You don't think he did it, then?" asked Flambeau. "I think," said Father Brown carefully, "that we are dealing with a crime of precision rather than passion, a composition rather than an improvisation, if you will. And like any composition, it required both inspiration and technique." Below, Lorenzo had paused in his work, his attention caught by something at the entrance to the bell tower, a scrap of paper that had apparently blown from an open door. He picked it up, glanced at it, then looked up sharply toward the tower itself, where a light had just appeared in the window. "The monastery has many secrets," mused Father Brown, watching this small drama unfold. "Some ancient, some quite new. And in the space between those secrets, I believe we will find the truth about Maestro Benedetto's death." The bells began to toll for vespers, their bronze voices measuring out the monastery's rhythm with mathematical precision. And in their ordered cadence, Father Brown heard not only the pulse of monastic life, but the echoes of a deadly calculation whose final sum was murder. Chapter 6. Encoded Melodies. There exists a curious relationship between music and mathematics, each speaking a language that the other somehow understands, though they appear to inhabit entirely different realms of human experience. It was this relationship that occupied Father Brown's thoughts as he sat in the empty chapel that evening, listening to Brother Ambrose play the specific chant that had been performed on the night of Benedetto's death. "From the beginning, if you please," said Father Brown, his round face attentive beneath the dim light of the sanctuary lamps, and play it exactly as it was performed that night, not as it was written. Brother Ambrose's hands hesitated above the keys. "I'm not sure I understand the distinction, Father." Maestro Benedetto's transcription and the actual performance, were they identical? Father Brown's mild voice carried a subtle insistence. The young monk looked uncomfortable. There were adaptations. Maestro Benedetto believed that certain passages required interpretation beyond the strict notation. "The very passages Lorenzo disputed, perhaps," suggested Father Brown. Brother Ambrose nodded reluctantly. "Yes, the sections with unusual harmonic progressions. Please play both versions, first as written in the original, then as Benedetto performed it." As the monk's fingers moved across the keys, the chapel filled with sound that seemed to belong to another century, austere, yet mysteriously beautiful. Father Brown closed his eyes, his lips moving slightly as though counting or perhaps praying. When the first version ended, Brother Ambrose paused. "And now as it was actually performed," prompted Father Brown. The second version began similarly, but as it progressed, subtle differences emerged, alterations in tempo, slight shifts in emphasis, and most notably, the omission of certain note progressions that had given the original its distinctive character. "He removed the very elements Lorenzo insisted were authentic," observed Flambeau, who stood near the altar with the abbot. "Benedetto considered them corruptions," said the abbot defensively. "Medieval copyists often introduced errors." "Or preserved knowledge others wished forgotten," suggested Father Brown quietly. "Brother Ambrose, the night Benedetto died, which version was performed?" "His version, of course," replied the monk, looking startled at the question. "We always followed his direction." Father Brown nodded thoughtfully. "And the specific chant scheduled for the moment of elevation during that Mass, was it the one we've just heard?" Brother Ambrose frowned in concentration. "No, that's odd. I believe we were to perform the Sanctus at that point. The Gloria came earlier." "Yet Benedetto died during the Gloria," said Father Brown. "Was there a change in the order of service?" "Not that I recall," said Brother Ambrose, "though with the special adaptations for Advent and the adjustments to the bell schedule." He trailed off, looking confused. Father Brown rose from his seat and approached the organ, examining the music still resting on the stand. "These markings in the margin, Benedetto's annotations?" "Yes," confirmed Brother Ambrose, "his reminders about tempo and emphasis." "And these numbers?" "Measure counts, I believe, for timing the performance." Father Brown's finger traced a sequence of numbers that appeared to have no relationship to the musical measures. "These as well?" Brother Ambrose leaned closer. I'm not sure what those indicate. They don't correspond to any musical notation I'm familiar with." Father Brown studied the numbers with careful attention, then turned to the abbot. "I should like to see Brother Thomas and his chronometer now, if that's possible." The bell tower's interior was a marvel of medieval engineering, massive wooden beams supporting the great bronze bells, with a complex system of ropes, wheels, and counterweights that enabled their precise movement. In a small chamber below the bells proper, Brother Thomas maintained his station, surrounded by several timepieces of varying antiquity. "The chronometer," said the elderly monk, indicating an instrument that resembled a marriage between an astronomical clock and a maritime chronometer. "Accurate to within 10 seconds per month." Father Brown examined the device with reverent appreciation. "Remarkable craftsmanship. And this controls the striking of the bells?" "It governs the schedule," corrected Brother Thomas. "The actual striking mechanism is there." He pointed to a complex arrangement of weights and levers connected to a rotating drum studded with pins. "A programming device," observed Flambeau with professional interest. "Like a music box, but for bells." "Exactly so," said Brother Thomas with evident pride. "The pattern of pins determines which bells sound, and in what sequence." Father Brown had moved to examine the drum. "And this pattern can be altered?" "With great care, yes. The pins can be repositioned to create different sequences or timing." "Was it altered recently?" asked Father Brown, his mild eyes suddenly sharp. Brother Thomas hesitated, glancing toward the abbot. "Maestro Benedetto requested some adjustments last month for the Advent services." "Adjustments to the sequence or the timing?" "Both," admitted Brother Thomas. "He said it was to better align certain musical passages with the acoustics of the chapel, a matter of resonance." Father Brown nodded as though something had been confirmed. "One final question. The speaking tube that connects this tower to the organ loft, is it still functional?" "Yes," said Brother Thomas, indicating a brass tube extending from the wall. "Though it's rarely used now. In the old days, before the chronometer, the organist would signal when to ring for certain parts of the liturgy." "I see," said Father Brown. "Might we test it?" At a nod from the abbot, Brother Thomas removed a small cap from the tube and spoke into it. "Can you hear me?" His voice echoed faintly down the metal passage. After a moment, Brother Ambrose's voice returned, thin but distinct. "Yes, perfectly." Father Brown thanked Brother Thomas and led the way back down the winding stone stairs to the courtyard. As they emerged into the cold night air, the monastery's great clock began to strike 9, each toll resonating across the snow-covered grounds with crystalline clarity. "You seem troubled, Father," observed the abbot, as they walked toward the guest quarters. "I am concerned," admitted Father Brown, "about harmony and its absence. Music, when correctly ordered, creates beauty from mathematical relationships, but those same relationships, when disordered—" He did not complete the thought, but his round face bore an expression of sorrowful certainty. In the precisely ordered world of the monastery, where every hour was announced and every note prescribed, someone had composed a different kind of harmony, one whose final chord was death. And Father Brown, listening with both his ears and his soul, had begun to discern its pattern. Chapter 7. False Harmonies. There is a particular quality to silence in places built for music, a tension like that of an instrument between notes, not truly empty, but rather pregnant with potential sound. The chapel of San Cipriano possessed this quality in abundance, as Father Brown stood alone in its shadowed nave early the following morning, the first grey light of dawn filtering through the ancient stained glass to create patterns on the stone floor as intricate as any musical score. He had come before the monk's first office, seeking the particular clarity that solitude brings. His round face, usually so mild and unassuming, wore an expression of troubled certainty as he moved slowly around the chapel, pausing at stations that had become significant in his invisible map of the crime: the organ loft, the choir stalls, the speaking tube, the bell pull near the sacristy door. "You have reached a conclusion," said a voice from the shadows. Father Brown showed no surprise as Flambeau emerged from the darkness near the confessional. "Not a conclusion," he replied. "Rather a composition. I can hear the melody now, though some notes remain unclear." "And what sort of melody is it?" asked the Frenchman, joining his friend beneath the rose window, where coloured light was gradually strengthening with the rising sun. "A requiem composed in mathematics," said Father Brown. "A death written in time and sound." He paused, his attention caught by something on the wall near the choir stalls, a small bronze plaque bearing a Latin inscription. Interesting. Before he could elaborate, they were interrupted by the arrival of the abbot, whose austere face showed signs of increasing strain. "Father Brown," he said, his voice carrying a new note of authority, "I must ask how much longer your investigation will continue. The brothers are unsettled, and we have received word that the provincial will be visiting next week. I had hoped this matter would be resolved before then." Father Brown regarded the abbot with mild eyes that nevertheless held a certain firmness. "I understand your concern, Father Abbot, but this is not a matter to be hurried. A man has been murdered with considerable ingenuity." "Lorenzo remains the obvious suspect," said the abbot. "His motive is clear, his character unstable." "And yet," said Father Brown gently, "his alibi appears sound, unless you believe a man can be in two places at once, or perhaps that time itself can be manipulated." The abbot's eyes narrowed slightly. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting," replied Father Brown, "that I should like to know the position of every monk in this community at the moment the third bell of the midnight office tolled on the night Benedetto died." This unusual request seemed to catch the abbot off guard. "The third bell?" "I don't understand the significance. Indulge me," said Father Brown, with a smile that somehow conveyed both humility and immovable purpose. After a moment's hesitation, the abbot nodded curtly. "Very well. I will have Brother Angelo compile the information, though I doubt it will reveal anything useful." "On the contrary," said Father Brown, "I believe it will confirm what the music has already told me." When the abbot had departed, clearly unsatisfied with this cryptic response, Flambeau turned to his friend with raised eyebrows. "The music has told you something?" "Indeed," replied Father Brown. "It has told me of a cleverly altered score, not just of notes, but of time itself." He glanced toward the organ loft. "I should like to examine the passageway behind the organ more carefully. There is something about its acoustics that troubles me." The narrow corridor behind the organ was dusty and dim, illuminated only by what little light filtered through cracks in the wooden panelling. Father Brown moved slowly, his attention focused not on the floor or walls, but on the ceiling, where ancient beams supported the weight of the massive instrument. "Here," he said at last, indicating a section of the ceiling where a small hatch was barely visible in the gloom. "Where does that lead?" Flambeau, being considerably taller, reached up to push at the hatch. It moved slightly, but appeared to be secured from above. "To the room above, I presume? Part of the bell tower, perhaps?" "The library wing adjoins the bell tower," mused Father Brown. "I wonder—" Their exploration was interrupted by the arrival of Brother Angelo, who informed them that the abbot requested their presence at breakfast, where Lorenzo had begun making accusations against several monks. The secretary's normally composed face showed signs of agitation. "He claims the true meaning of the chants has been deliberately suppressed," said Brother Angelo as they followed him across the courtyard. "He is demanding access to Benedetto's papers to prove his theories." In the refectory, they found a scene of unusual disorder for a monastic community. Lorenzo stood at one end of the long table, his face flushed with anger, while several monks attempted to calm him. The abbot's expression was one of cold fury barely contained. "These harmonics are not random," Lorenzo was saying as they entered. "They are a deliberate encoding of knowledge the Church has suppressed for centuries. Benedetto knew this. He found the proof in Rome." "Blasphemy and delusion," replied the abbot sharply. "Father Brown, perhaps you can help restore order. This man is disturbing the peace of our community with his wild theories." Father Brown regarded Lorenzo with mild interest. "What knowledge do you believe these harmonics encode precisely?" The question, asked in such a calm, matter-of-fact tone, seemed to catch Lorenzo off guard. He hesitated, then replied with careful precision. mathematical relationships that affect the physical world, frequencies that can alter the human body, its perceptions, its functions. The ancients understood this science, but it was labelled sorcery and suppressed. Or perhaps, suggested Father Brown, it was recognized as dangerous and set aside. Not all knowledge serves wisdom. That's what Benedetto said, replied Lorenzo bitterly. He found the proof I needed in that Vatican manuscript, then claimed the notations were mere copying errors. But I know he was lying. He understood their significance. Father Brown nodded thoughtfully. Knowledge that could affect bodily functions, he mused, including perhaps the stopping of a heart. A profound silence fell over the refectory. Lorenzo's face paled slightly, but his eyes remained defiant. I did not kill him. I believe you, said Father Brown simply. But I wonder, who else understood the power of these harmonics? Who else might have had reason to silence Maestro Benedetto? He turned to the abbot. I should like to request a full Vespers service this evening, with all brothers in attendance, and the bells should be rung according to the traditional schedule, not Benedetto's modifications. The abbot frowned. For what purpose? To hear a harmony restored, replied Father Brown, and perhaps to unmask a discord. As they left the refectory, the monastery bells began to toll for the morning office, their bronze voices measuring time with the same mathematical precision that had, in Father Brown's developing theory, been turned to lethal purpose. In their ordered sequence he heard not merely the call to prayer, but the final notes of a mystery approaching its resolution. Chapter 8. The Devil in the Details. There is something particularly solemn about Vespers in winter, when darkness falls early, and the ancient rhythm of monastic life seems to stand as a bulwark against both the literal night and the figurative darkness that has always surrounded human existence. As the monks of San Cipriano filed into the chapel that evening, each face illuminated briefly by candlelight before being subsumed again into shadow. Father Brown stood quietly near the altar, his round figure unremarkable yet somehow central to the gathering, like the still point around which a complex mechanism revolves. The abbot had reluctantly agreed to his request for a full service with traditional bell ringing, though his austere face betrayed both skepticism and a growing impatience. Lorenzo had been permitted to attend, but was seated apart from the monks, his expressive face a study in barely contained emotion. Brother Ambrose sat nervously at the organ, his fingers poised above the keys, while Brother Thomas had taken his place near the bell pull, ready to sound the traditional calls to prayer rather than the modified schedule Benedetto had implemented. When all were assembled, Father Brown moved to stand before them, his mild face illuminated by the altar candles. Before Vespers begins, he said in his gentle voice that nevertheless carried to every corner of the ancient chapel, I should like to explain what happened to Maestro Benedetto. A murmur passed through the assembled monks, quickly stilled by a sharp glance from the abbot. Proceed, Father, he said, though I fail to see why this could not wait until after prayers. Because, replied Father Brown simply, prayers are part of the explanation. He turned to address the entire community. This murder was not a crime of passion or opportunity, but of precise calculation, a composition in time, sound, and poison, whose notes were written in bell tolls and measured in prayer. He moved to the centre of the chapel, where the patterns of coloured light from the rose window would have fallen had it been daylight. Maestro Benedetto was poisoned during midnight mass, but not in the way we initially assumed. He was not killed by something administered just before his collapse, but by a substance he had unwittingly consumed hours earlier, a poison with delayed effect, time to coincide with a specific moment in the service. Impossible, said the abbot sharply. How could anyone predict the exact moment? By rewriting time itself, said Father Brown. Or rather, by altering how time was measured within these walls. He gestured toward Brother Thomas. The changes to the bell schedule that Benedetto himself requested, they were not for musical purposes, but to create a precise alibi. He turned to Brother Ambrose. The chant that was being performed when Benedetto died, it should have been the Sanctus, but it was the Gloria instead. The order of service had been subtly altered, just as the bell schedule had been. Father Brown moved toward the organ loft, his steps deliberate. But there was something more ingenious still, the musical notations themselves. Those disputed harmonics that Lorenzo believed contained ancient knowledge and Benedetto dismissed as copyist errors. They did indeed encode a science, though not in the way Lorenzo imagined. He paused, his mild eyes moving from face to face in the assembly. When rendered at precise frequencies, certain harmonic combinations can indeed affect the human body, including, as it happens, triggering the release of a poison that had been designed to activate only under specific acoustic condition. Lorenzo started from his seat. That's what I've been trying to... Please, interrupted Father Brown gently. Allow me to finish. He turned back to the assembled monks. Benedetto discovered this knowledge in the Vatican manuscript, the one that is now conveniently missing. He recognized its potential danger and sought to suppress it, just as the Church had done centuries before. But someone else understood its significance as well, someone who used Benedetto's own musical scholarship against him. "This is absurd," said the abbot. "You speak of poisons activated by sound, by specific harmonics at specific frequencies, in a body already prepared by a preliminary compound," clarified Father Brown. "A forgotten science rediscovered in ancient notation. Benedetto ingested the first compound in his evening meal, a compound with no effect unless activated by the second stage. That activation was triggered not by a second poison administered directly, but by specific sound frequencies that occurred only when the altered Gloria was played at precisely the moment the third bell of the modified schedule tolled." He turned to Brother Ambrose. "Would you play the passage in question, the one Benedetto was performing at the moment of his death?" With trembling hands, Brother Ambrose began to play. The haunting melody filled the chapel, rising toward the vaulted ceiling. Father Brown held up his hand when a specific progression began. "There," he said. "That harmonic sequence, when combined with the precise resonance of the third bell under the altered schedule, triggered the fatal reaction. It is a science that seems like sorcery to modern minds, but the ancients understood the physical power of sound in ways we have forgotten." "And who," asked the abbot coldly, "arranged this elaborate murder?" "Someone with access to both the bell mechanism and Benedetto's musical compositions," said Father Brown. "Someone who understood both the ancient notations and the principles of acoustics. Someone who had reason to want not only Benedetto silenced, but his research suppressed." He turned slowly to face Brother Domenico, who sat utterly still among the other monks, his scholarly face devoid of expression. "The librarian," said Father Brown, "who found in those ancient manuscripts a knowledge he believed too dangerous to be rediscovered, even by a scholar as renowned as Benedetto. The same knowledge Lorenzo had glimpsed but not fully understood." Brother Domenico did not rise or protest. His eyes, behind their scholarly spectacles, showed neither surprise nor fear, only a terrible, calm certainty. "He would have published it," he said at last, his voice quiet but perfectly audible in the hushed chapel. "He dismissed the dangers as superstition, but I had tested the principles. I knew what such knowledge could do in the wrong hands." "So you arranged for him to demonstrate its power upon himself," said Father Brown, "using his own modifications to the bell schedule and his own musical compositions to deliver the fatal harmonics." "A necessary silence," replied Brother Domenico, almost gently. "Some knowledge is not meant to be reclaimed from the past." The abbot had risen, his face ashen. "Brother Thomas, summon help from the village." As Brother Thomas moved toward the door, Brother Domenico remained seated, making no attempt to flee or resist. His eyes met Father Brown's with something like recognition. "You understand, I think," he said. "Some truths are too dangerous for our fallen world." "I understand," replied Father Brown sadly, "that you committed the very sin you sought to prevent, using forbidden knowledge to destroy life rather than preserve it. The true blasphemy was not in the ancient music, but in setting yourself as the arbiter of who should live or die." Later, as the civil authorities led Brother Domenico away through the snow-covered courtyard, Father Brown stood with Flambeau near the chapel door, watching as monastery bells tolled the hour in their ancient, unmodified sequence. "A murder committed through mathematics and music," mused Flambeau. "One of your more unusual cases, my friend." "Yet one of the oldest stories," replied Father Brown, his round face sorrowful in the fading light. "Knowledge without wisdom, power without compassion. The first temptation in Eden was not for an apple, but for the godlike power to decide good and evil for oneself." Above them, the bells continued their measured counting of time, their bronze voices neither good nor evil in themselves, but merely instruments that could serve either harmony or discord, depending on the heart of the one who arranged their sequence. And in their solemn cadence, Father Brown heard not only the closing measure of one man's requiem, but the eternal rhythm of human pride and its inevitable fall. Thanks for joining us for the Devil's Psalms. Did you suspect Brother Domenico before Father Brown revealed how he orchestrated the murder through harmonics and altered bell schedules? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this adventure with Father Brown, don't forget to hit subscribe for more mysteries daily. Until next time, remember Father Brown's wisdom. Knowledge without compassion is perhaps the most dangerous force in our world, and the truest blasphemy lies not in forbidden knowledge, but in setting oneself as the arbiter of who should live or die. This is Alfie signing off from Café Stories.